Sorry, 1 second. It takes a second to go through on YouTube. So
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the second annual lecture series hosted by the Oxford Centre for Buddhist Studies in conjunction with the Dhammachai International Research Institute of New Zealand. So this is the second annual lecture series we've hosted with DIRI, and the OCBS is very grateful for their support and look forward to maintaining an academic collaboration in the years to come. So in this series this year, we have 3 lectures. Each at 4 p.m. GMT in successive weeks. Today we have Dr. Aleix Ruiz Falqués, who I will introduce in a moment. On the 5th of March, we have Professor Alice Collette from the University of St. Andrews, who will be talking about gender and Buddhist doctrine. And then on March the 12th, I will be speaking, giving a talk entitled Anuruddha and Mahakachana, Tracing the Contours of 2 Early Buddhist Lineages. Today we have Dr. Aleix Ruiz Falqués, and he will be giving a talk entitled Editing Jātakas in the 15th Century, Ariyavaṃsa's Jātakavisodhana and Premodern Pali Philology. Dr. Ruiz Falqués is the Khyentse postdoctoral fellow at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, head of the Department of Pali and Language at Shan State Buddhist University, and is working also as an editor on 2 projects in Thailand. There is the Dhammachai Tipitaka project and the Royal Thai Tipitaka project. The first is a project editing critically the text of the Pali Tipitaka. The second is a new translation project dealing with the Pali canon. Dr. Aleix is a specialist in the Pali language and literature generally, but especially the Pali grammatical and scholastic traditions of medieval Burma. So we're delighted to have him talking here, and I will pass over to him now. And just finally mention that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed. If anybody has any questions, please send a message to Stephen in chat and say that you'd like to ask a question at the end. So without further ado, here is Dr. Aleix Ruiz Falqués.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you to the Oxford Centre for Buddhist Studies and the IRI for inviting me to give this talk. I'm very happy to be here. To be honest, I didn't even know about the existence of this series, so that was a discovery of even prior recordings. And also welcome everyone who is here live, and I guess because this will be recorded, everyone who is coming later. I'm going to share screen, and as usual nowadays, I'm going to share some slides. I think everyone is familiar with the format. And we'll have some question and answer at the end. Because the topic is, I guess it's probably not familiar to the majority of Pali scholars or scholars who work on Pali texts, because the majority, I believe, of scholars who work on Pali work on canonical texts. That means early Buddhist texts. I will try not to delve into the details and the context too much, and I will jump directly into the topic. So before I start, I would also like to dedicate this talk to my friend and teacher, Venerable U Kondenyakitty, whom I met at the Dhammachai Tipitaka project. He is partly responsible, at least for all the good things in this talk. He has provided me valuable information, and actually, along with Venerable Kondenyakitty, we were working on the Jātakavisodhana for some time. I already had some interest in this work for the reasons that I will explain. And he was also interested in that, so we had similar interest, and for some time we were working on a project that was supposed to be his PhD, but because of the political situation in Burma, that was discontinued. So I've been trying to continue on that same line of research, and he has been helping me, he's still helping me, so I would like to dedicate that to my dear friend, Venerable U Kondenyakitty. Now, in this talk, I'm going to discuss a few issues. So broadly, we will be talking about philology, what it means, and more specifically, what Pali philology means. If it means anything. I mean, we generally use the term, especially if you read Western philology on Pali, then we use the term philology. Of course, we don't have any better word, but I think it is not a term that we should take for granted. So that will be the first part of the lecture. And then we will transition to the concept of Visodhana. That means purification. And as I will show, it's probably one of the possible ways to translate philology, or it's one of the meanings of philology in Pali. And then we will move into Ariyavaṃsa's Jātakavisodhana. As you can see, that Jātakavisodhana is not a typo. It's a way to transcribe the Burmese title, a kind of way to transcribe the Burmese title. We'll talk about the edition, the life of Ariyavaṃsa, the method of this work, whether it is philology or not, and give some examples. As you can see, partly the idea was to go from broad to from universal to specific, or from the big picture to the small details. The examples are left at the end. I think that's the most boring part of the not just boring. It's too much detail for the non-specialist, but I think this is a topic that is relevant to anyone working on Pali, because this is about the history of Pali texts as they have been transmitted by copying manuscripts from one to another. So we start with philology, and the term philology has been, even in the West, has been defined in different ways. The first citation, the first quote, is from a famous textbook for classical philologists. That's Rudolf Pfeiffer's History of Classical Scholarship. The very beginning, there is a definition of what scholarship is, and I have chosen this one just for the simple biographical or autobiographical reason that when I studied philology in Spain, we read the Spanish version of this book, and instead of we don't have a specific word for scholarship, so they translated filología. So the Spanish version says philology is the art of understanding. So that's how I learned philology. But actually in English it says scholarship, which is something a little bit different, but connected. So scholarship is the art of understanding, explaining, and restoring the literary tradition. Restoring is important here. It originated as a separate intellectual discipline in the 3rd century before Christ through the efforts of poets, that is also important, to preserve and to use their literary heritage, the classics. So scholarship actually arose as classical scholarship. That's one of the main theses of Pfeiffer. And that's generally, I think, in the West, or until recently, that wasn't questioned, and scholarship meant classical scholarship. Philology meant the philology of classical Greek and Latin texts, especially. Now here we have another classical definition of classical philology. This is from this book. Sorry, there's no, I'll give the references later if necessary, Ugolini and Lanza. That's also a history of philology. And it says, however, in collecting these ancient texts, the librarians of Alexandria played an extraordinary part in their homogenization, and by editing and classifying them, they also started that effort of reflection that later took the name of philology. So it's an effort of reflection that took the name of philology. It could be said that the man of letters and the philologist descend from the librarian, that they were originally the same person. I think that is an interesting thesis, an interesting hypothesis. It's, as far as I could see, like the majority of classical scholars, at least until recently, that is my teachers, for instance, they sort of took this for granted, and that originally as a technique, as a sort of art or technique, the technique or art of the philologist comes from the craft of the librarian, the person who has many manuscripts, many codices or books, and has to sort them out, decide which ones are older, which ones are correct, incorrect, etc. There's another quote here from the same book, just making it clear that the word for philologist, although as you all know, the word philology comes from Greek philo, that means to love, and logos, that means word or language. But initially, the word for philologist was not philologos in Greek, but grammatikos, that means grammarian. So that's an interesting point. I think it is also relevant, or it could help us also to understand a little bit more about the Pali the Pali tradition, the Pali grammatical tradition and philological tradition in the Middle Ages. So it says it was only during the following century that the study of ancient texts became independent from the production of new ones. That's interesting because it was not initially so. In Pali, we can also see how the production of new texts is not independent from the preservation of old ones, but that's a different topic. At which point the grammaticos, that is the philologist, was born. Philologos, in fact, had a different meaning in Greek and was used to refer to someone prone to dialogue or even futile chatter. Now, so that's placing or dating the beginnings of philology at the time of what we call the Hellenistic time in today's Egypt, in Alexandria, in Greece, ancient Greece, or the Hellenistic Alexandria. Then later on, philology developed, and in modern times, I think we can agree that philology basically started developing in the 16th, 17th century after the Renaissance. And one of the short definitions or handy definitions for philology would be the art of conjecture. That would be the most restricted or narrow definition that I would use. It's the art of conjecture, and here the conjecture means conjecturing what the right reading, what the correct lectio or reading is when there is discrepancy among manuscripts. So we can have several manuscripts, they read different things, or there might be a lacuna, there might be a gap, there may be something that is clearly wrong everywhere in all the manuscripts. So we need a conjecture to make sense of that text. So here, like, the conjecture and making sense of the text are partly the same thing, but not exactly the same thing. So this definition would be more restricted. The philology would be the art of conjecture, in the sense that the philologist is a person who compares manuscripts and decides which one is correct. And if all seem to be wrong, then the philologist possesses such a mastery in that particular type of literature that person is able to produce a conjecture. So the conjecture would be the quintessence or the epitome of philology. A little bit more modern definition that, if I'm not wrong, I think originally comes from Friedrich Nietzsche, but I don't know if that was the inspiration for Professor Pollock, but definitely Sheldon Pollock uses it. And in short, this is obviously qualified. I'm just giving the short hand definition. Philology would be the discipline of making sense of texts. But that is different, because that is not just the art of conjecture. It's not restricted to manuscripts. It's basically studying several types of texts. It can be ancient, modern, in one language or another. We're not talking about textual criticism directly, although it is included. It's just making sense of text. Of course, this is a broad definition that is very helpful in many ways, but the obvious problem is that it's too broad. And in many cases, if the discipline of making sense of text, it could be anything. If I go to the market and I'm trying to say something to the shopkeeper and they don't understand me, they're trying to make sense of what I'm saying, that would also be philology, which is possible, but maybe it's not very helpful in our particular endeavor, because what we are interested in is in Pali philology. That's one of the points that I'm going to try to argue in this talk, is that when we talk about Pali philology, it can be philology, but philology in itself doesn't mean anything. We have to qualify it, and then depending on the area of studies, depending on the language, depending on the corpus of text, depending on which literature we are talking about, then philology will be one thing or the other, because it pretty much depends on the materials that we are working on and the problems that derive from this body of materials. There must be problems, of course. Without textual problems of misunderstanding, there is no philology. I think that is agreed by everyone. In the case of Pali philology, then we'll have to see what these problems are, and they will pretty much depend on the body of text, the material objects that carry this text, and so on. In this case, it is the palm leaf manuscripts mostly. So if we would take Pali philology following Pollock as the discipline of making sense of text, then the famous commentaries, beginning with Buddhaghosa or even earlier, that would be philology. Then we could say that Pali philology begins, I don't know, with the Niddesa, even in the Pali canon, or certainly Buddhaghosa was a philologist. That's not the way we generally talk about Buddhaghosa, and that's not how we generally or conventionally use the category of philology. If, for instance, when I say conventionally, I don't know exactly who is the Pope or the Church in Pali philology, but pretty much we use the Critical Pali Dictionary as a standard. And if you go to the list of works, how the Critical Pali Dictionary organizes the different categories of text, following an ancient and long tradition even in Southeast Asian catalogs, there is a separate category for philology. That's number 5, if I'm not wrong. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 is philology. That includes grammars, etc. But philology in the Critical Pali Dictionary doesn't include the Nidesa. It doesn't include Buddhaghosa. It doesn't include what we generally call commentaries. But it could be. There is philology certainly in the commentaries. And then we have another area or another tag or category that is grammar, that in Pali develops relatively late. It develops after Buddhaghosa. That means after 1,000 years of the Buddha. But grammar could be certainly philology. Whether Pali grammars, they deal with textual criticism, that is a different story. They don't concentrate, they don't focus on textual criticism. They may be helpful, but Pali grammar is not textual criticism. It's not what we generally would call philology. So the discipline of making sense of text in Pali, that excludes, at least at the moment, I would exclude textual criticism. And the question is whether we have textual criticism in the Pali tradition or not, or we have to wait until some Europeans went to Sri Lanka and Burma and Thailand. They discovered Pali, they connected it to Sanskrit, so on and so forth. They decided to produce critical editions, and that's how Pali textual criticism originated. Of course, that is not the case, because there is something that is very close. Maybe we can analogically call it textual, local or indigenous textual criticism, but there's something like that. It's not commentary, it's not grammar. Then, of course, in the history of Pali or Theravada philosophy, there is something that approaches the art of philology, the art of making sense of words or text, that would be included, if we are generous, in the third Patisambhida. As you know, the Patisambhida is not a concept that is generally used in the canon, at least in the earliest parts of the Pali canon. It's comparatively late, or it will be later than the Digha, Majjhima Nikaya, and so on. But it is there. It's already of course, in the Patisambhida Magga and other places. And the third one, the Nirutti Patisambhida, if we follow the definitions and the descriptions in the literature, that is philology, like sometimes restoring or recognizing which orthography or which pronunciation is correct against another pronunciation that is incorrect. So that, maybe in a nutshell, it contains the idea of philology, but of course it doesn't develop in this line. We don't have treatises on textual criticism called like the Nirutti Patisambhida of that text or anything like that. Then, just as maybe an anecdote, I don't know, but the word philology has been used relatively recently in this book, The Legacy of the Jewel Mind, by Professor Dragomir Dimitrov, that is a good friend. And he plays with words here. I mean, that is I never asked him exactly how he did it, but it's a philological chronicle, and then he kind of uses the supposedly the Pali word for philological chronicle, that is Pullalochanavamsa. There is a pun here, kind of alankara. Pulla literally means blooming, or it can mean splitting. Lochana is the eye or illuminating, and Vamsa is the chronicle. So actually, even though he uses the word Pullalochana doesn't mean philology. It's not a word that it really exists in Pali, although it would be nice if philology in Pali would mean the blooming of the eye or something like this, but that is not the case. But we still use the word philology, in this case for a great scholar of the 10th century. Now, in a very interesting book that so far is one of the few books that I've seen that it explores and problematizes the concept of philology in South Asia, and that also applies, of course, to Pali Southeast Asia, is Whitney Cox's Modes of Philology, published in 2016. And the introduction is very useful, at least it has been very useful for me. there is an attempt to find Sanskrit words that also exist, obviously, in Pali, to express something that would be close to our concept of philology. And one of them is Vyakhyana. As you know, Vyakhyana means exposition or explication. That would be something closer to what we call the commentary or Atthakatha. So it's not entirely satisfactory, we could say. And the other one is Vyutpatti, as this one is inspired in the Sanskrit Tibetan, the famous Sanskrit Tibetan dictionary, the Great Vyutpatti, that literally means the development or cultivation. It is something related to lexicography and philology, certainly connected to philology, but again, it's not entirely satisfactory as an exact equivalent of what we call philology as textual criticism in Sanskrit or in Pali. Now, if we would try to find the origins, not one single origin, but the origins, the different origins of Pali philology, and I conjecture to say that it is already there in the ancient, in the old art of the commentary, already in what we call canonical texts, so the Padavajaniya, like commenting on specific words, and sometimes this commentary includes variant readings or different possibilities of understanding. The Nirdesa, of course, that is one of the works in the Khuddaka Nikaya, and in some Sanskrit canons, it's one of the categories of the literature, that is the explanation of the meaning. I would say also that in the very art of writing and copying manuscripts, that is from the moment, we don't know exactly when, but when writing was introduced and the art of copying manuscripts, that means writing implies then copying what has been written, some sort of understanding of the problems that come with writing would have developed into some sort of theory. At the end of the day, when Buddhaghosa talks about variant readings, he uses the term pata. And it could be, pata can mean the recitation of something that is recited. It could still refer to something that is oral, but it seems that he's referring specifically to written variants. So the art of writing obviously will develop into philology. Then maybe that is less obvious, but political pressure to centralize and unify knowledge can also lead to some types of philological discourse. Now I'm using philology as a type of discourse on language to make sense of language, to make sense of a text in a certain way, and also here to unify editions. That's also similar to some of the ideas that we use in the West in textual criticism. We always try to go back to the, if not the original, some sort of archetype, and we always assume that there is one form that is authoritative. We try to centralize the reading or the meaning into one form, and the rest are just variants or mistakes or whatnot. And then the fourth source for the development of Pali philology would be grammar, because I think that we can say we don't see any text on Pali philology as the ones that I'm going to describe subsequently, like Ariyavaṃsa's Visodhana. We don't see these sorts of texts without Pali grammar having developed before. So that's another requisite. Now, the term that refers to what we call philology, or it's quite close to philology as textual criticism in Pali, is Visodhana. And as you can see, it means purification, or if you want to be more precise, complete purification, or purification by removal of things that are wrong or dirty. And it is quite obvious that purification doesn't seem a very technical term, at least linguistically. We don't find, for instance, the word Visodhana in Sanskrit text used in the sense of philology. At least, for instance, Whitney Cox doesn't mention it. But that's the term that in practice is used when Pali scholars of what we would call the Middle Ages want to refer, or they refer to what we call textual criticism or philology as textual criticism. So it is purification in the sense that we remove the impurities. And this again is it's very, very much connected to the impurities that come up with the copying of manuscripts. So it seems that it's an art, or it's a technique that necessarily develops when the manuscript tradition also develops and the mistakes are introduced inevitably. So when mistakes are introduced, we need to clean them up, we need to purify them, and then a certain technique by a certain specialist needs to be developed so that someone, when that person, that specialist, finds a manuscript, those who have experience with Pali manuscripts will understand that easily. When you find the manuscript, it is unclean. It is not clean. It is not purified. It's dirty. It's like a piece of land that needs to be trimmed and cleaned. There are many bad weeds. There are many mistakes. Because of these mistakes, some parts don't make sense. Others make sense, but they are just not right. They are not good enough. There are orthographic mistakes and so on. And in this case, specifically because we are talking about the word of the Buddha, the speech of the Buddha, there is great care in making sure that everything is nice and clean. So copying manuscripts inevitably will produce mistakes, but also there needs to be someone who will be able to clear these mistakes so that the next copies will not develop into something completely meaningless. Like if there would be no one cleaning up the Pali text from time to time, it is likely perhaps that eventually the word of the Buddha would be lost or completely meaningless. Now, the word purification, that is Visodhana, is used not only when we talk about textual criticism or philology, but also in, as we said before, we try to connect the politics with philology, and here there's an example. There is a concept that is used by historians of religion in Burma that is what's called the Sasana reform. But generally, this term Sasana reform is a translation of the purification of the Sasana. That's the Sasana Visodhana. That's the Pali term that is used. You'll see this Pali term used in chronicles. Here, I'm specifically talking about Burmese chronicles, but they use this term. So from time to time, if possible, the king will purify the Sangha and will purify the order. And that is termed the Sasana Visodhana. And of course, the word Sasana, that means religion broadly. It means the order. It means Buddhism. It can mean just Buddhism, purifying the religion. Or it can mean the teaching, the text. So the Sasana Visodhana it includes the purification of the text, but as you can see here in this article by Michael Antoine, it says that by the 11th century, the Sangha of Pagan needed purification. This word purification, why an English-speaking historian would use this word, that's explained because of what I said, because they are translating the concept Visodhana into English to explain why reform means purification. So reform, yeah, I think this is not so different from other types of reform. I'm thinking, of course, of the Lutheran reform, but they use specifically this word purification, and that comes directly from the chronicles. King Aniruddha, with monks from Lower Burma, proceeded to persecute the heretics. This is all based on chronicles that maybe are not very reliable, but this is what we have been told. In the mid-12th century, King Narapatisitu purified the order by sending a few chosen monks to Ceylon, to Sri Lanka, to be reordained. And we learn from the chronicles that they also learned Pali and grammar at the Mahavihara. Then they came back and they were responsible for the edition of the new copies of the Tipitaka and so on and so forth. So that was also part of the Sangha reform. Then bringing them back to reform the order in Burma. In the mid-13th century, the king Kyochwa faced strong and wealthy Sangha, which he attempted to reduce in size and power, but his failure subsequently brought the Pagan dynasty to an end. So this is the political version of what happens if you fail to purify, the proliferation of mistakes and wrong forms. Then in that case, the demise, the fall of the dynasty of Pagan is explained as the inability of the king to purify and to trim the order. But the same concept is used philologically, so to say, with the text. Now, one of the earliest forms, I mean, this is later than Ariyavaṃsa, but it's another one that uses the word Visodhana. It's a text that has Visodhana in the title. It's called Jātakavisodhana. And I studied this text a little bit a few years ago, just because I was interested in this concept because of my study of grammar. And that means the purification of the Patimokkha text. And I could talk more about this Patimokkha Visodhana, but suffice it to say that it's an attempt to produce an edition, or at least to provide philological notes for an improvement of the edition of the Patimokkha. According to the preface or the introduction of this text, it seems that the goal was to produce a Patimokkha text that could be used throughout the Burmese Empire. We have to remember that Burma was kind of imperial polity. There was a central Burma, but then there were other smaller kingdoms that were also Buddhist religiously, but they didn't follow the same lineages. They also had their own Patimokkha's in their own script, etc., etc. So here, in this quote, you can see a little bit what the methodology of Ariyavaṃsa was. Like he says, when it is stated that in some places, he uses the term kattachi, that say, when I say kattachi, that has to be understood, it refers to the manuscript that has been purified by Dhammadaja Thera. And then he gives other kind of abbreviations in the same way that today we would say manuscript A or B or X. Then he uses a code. He says kattachi will mean this, kochi will mean that, kesuchi will mean that, etc. He's using different manuscripts of the Patimokkha in different scripts that he collected from different places. And his goal is to decide which readings are correct, so that throughout the empire, we will be reading the same Patimokkha. This is important, of course, for the Vinaya ceremonies, that everyone reads the same text, recite the same text, so it is valid. In any case, I wanted to highlight also the fact that he is already referring to a manuscript that had been edited, that had been purified by Dhammadaja Thera. And this is one of the points that I would like to make here, because when we talk about Pali philology, it seems, well, at least it seemed to me at some point, until I found out about these traditions, that what we have is a very large number of manuscripts, and they are wrong. And the role of the modern philologist is just to take a few manuscripts and restore the text. But I didn't know that had been done already. So, which means that probably our texts are quite consistent, as is well known. So the Pali manuscripts are full of mistakes, but they are generally quite good. And if you compare Pali manuscripts from Thailand and Sri Lanka and Burma, they are quite similar. They're pretty much similar. So that is not surprising if we take into account that there's been a sustained effort through the centuries to keep purifying the text. And every time there was a major purification of the sasana, then a group of scholars would meet and purify the manuscripts. So we knew more or less about that, but I never seen actual examples. And this is one example, just with the Patimokkha. So the fact that he's using the term, or that he's referring to a manuscript that has been edited, that's quite interesting, I think, from the point of view that the historian of Theravada textuality, that it was something more or less normal, or that people would understand what he means when he says that he's using a manuscript that has been purified. So it's a high quality manuscript. But other manuscripts are low quality, but he has good quality manuscripts. So not all the manuscripts are of the same quality. Some of them have been cleaned up, purified. Now, later on, this is from the 19th century. And again, I have to thank my friend Venerable Konde Nyekiti for showing me this text. This is, as you see, the title is Jātakavisodhana. Again, the concept of Visodhana is there. Ganti Cham. Cham means a book. I will discuss this term later. It's a Burmese word. Ganti is a book on difficult words. And Visodhana is a Jātakavisodhana. Is the book that purifies, that cleans up the Pitaka, the Tipitaka. So this is not just the Patimokkha, it's cleaning the whole Pitaka, the whole Tipitaka. It was written by this venerable monk, this scholar, Upanyavamsa Abhikavidaja. Abhikavidaja seems to be the title, like the banner of the excellent poet or something like this, or excellent erudite. So the author was unhappy with the 5th Council edition. That's not the edition that we are using now. It's the edition from the 70s in the 19th century. In Mandalay, as you know, this is well known for the Kutodo Pagoda stone slabs, but also many of the manuscripts that we have represent that edition of the canon. And this scholar monk, he was unhappy with that, so he produced a number of he wrote by hand a number of notes, correcting or suggesting better readings in comparison to the Kutodo Pagoda. And I don't know much about the history or the story of this monk, To be honest, I just discovered him this month when I was preparing this talk, because I confused him with another one that I'll mention later. But apparently he, in response to the 5th century stone slab project, he created his own canon, or he kind of fostered his own canon. And that's, again, according to my friend U Kondanyakiti, if I understood it well. So there is this monastery in Yenanjiao. It's a city in Burma. And you can see how there are different departments here, different areas. And we have the canon on stone slabs. This is the Tipitaka in stone slabs. They are very similar to the Kuto-do Pagoda in Mandalay, but this is not Mandalay. This is Yenanjiao. That, by the way, is an oil city. It's a petrol city that started producing petrol from the 10th century, like before the Westerners arrived. That's a different story. So in this city, there is this monastery. I haven't visited it. And according to my friend Venerable Kondanyakiti, these stone slabs and his notes, the notes that were later on printed in this book, they should be still kept in manuscript form in that monastery. But because of the conditions, political conditions and social conditions, it is not sure that anyone is taking care of that. So it is possible that these manuscripts are lost. But in any case, you can see here how people did not just accept whatever the king or whatever the main representative of the Sangha would say about the text. Some scholars, they disagree on the centralized editions, so they produced their own. And this is a more recent one. As you can see, the book was published in 1977. Is the Jātakavisodhana Jam. Again, is similar title, as you can see. That's why I was confused. I thought it was the same person and the same book, but it's two different books. The difference is that this one criticizes the 6th council, not the 5th, and that was written by U Ariyavaṃsa. Ariyavaṃsa being the title, the great knowledgeable erudite, and Media is the author. So here you can see the picture, and this is the cover. So that, again, is a book that discusses variant readings in the Tipitaka. Of course, in this case, you can say, well, this is very recent. There is much influence from Western scholarship, so we cannot say that this is Pali traditional scholarship. But in any case, it seems that the methodology that this venerable author was using is very similar to Ariyavaṃsa. And some of this, from my understanding, from what I've been reading and what I could understand, they see the work of Ariyavaṃsa that I'm going to discuss subsequently as one of the examples of their work. So they choose 2 or 3 variants of a word, and then this is just a table of contents, of course, but they are aware that there are variants, and they discuss which one is better. So now, to show some examples, we'll go back to the 15th century and discuss the Jātakavisodhana or Jātakavisodhana, purifying the Jātaka text. First of all, I would like to mention the edition, not the text itself, but why do we have this text? Why is it printed? Because it's actually printed. I have a photocopy here of the printed edition. That's the one I used. There is also a PDF that is available online thanks to the Göttingen library in Germany. And the book was in Göttingen because Professor Heinz Beschert was there. That's the reason, because he collected many books from Burma, including this rarity, this Jātakavisodhana. It's not a very well-known book, but scholars know it. It's mentioned in chronicles. It's mentioned in the famous Pali literature of Burma by Mabel Bode. So it is known. It's just that the content, no one knew exactly what the book is about and what the contents are. And the Venerable Sayadaw U Silananda, who actually took part in the 6th council, he was one of the editors of the canon that we use, if we use the VRI canon or the Burmese edition. At some point, he, along with his friends and colleagues, I guess, and like-minded scholars, I think they attempted to create a series of books and editions in Burma that had the name Pitaka Vyuha Apwe, the Pitaka Army, something like that, or the Association for the troops to save the Pitaka or something. I was about to say the Pitaka Salvation Army, but it's something like that, because the idea, the main goal was to print important treatises that remained in manuscript form. And one of them was Ariyavaṃsa's Jātakavisodhana. So at the end of the book, there is a kind of note or long note on what's the goal and what are the aims of this project. That I don't think it went very far. But the first book that they published in the 75 was this book by Makaralopa Kinjipyo, a name that probably doesn't ring a bell to anyone. But I actually recently talked about this particular teacher in this PTS lecture. I will publish the article soon, but he was a great erudite in the 18th, 19th century, and he produced a number of books, and he's very well known in Burma. And the first book in this series was the Burmese translation of the Kalyani stone inscriptions. So there is some kind of philological interest behind the rationale of the series. The first book in the Pitaka Vyuha series in Burma was a Burmese translation of the Kalyani stone inscription, I guess with editorial notes and so on. But this is a translation that was produced in the 19th century, probably early 19th century or late 18th century by Kinjipyo, the Makaralopa. By the way, maybe some of you already know, but this name Makaralopa is not that he was Makatalopa or a sea monster or anything like that. Makaralopa means that he dropped the word ma, and ma being a Burmese word that means no, because he dropped the word no because there was nothing that he would not know. So he always had an answer, and that was he was called Makaralopa. He had a very broad knowledge about everything, whether it was about Buddhism or outside the Sasana. Then the second book in the series is the Jātakavisodhana by Ariyavaṃsa, the one that we're going to discuss. And the third one that was planned, I have never seen it, but that's the Vajrabuddhitika Nisaya. That's a Burmese commentary on the Vajrabuddhitika. And the Vajrabuddhi is famous. The Vajrabuddhitika is famous again for the discussion of difficult words in the Vinaya. So that's one of the Vinaya Tikas written by a so-called Vajrabuddhi. So Ariyavaṃsa, the author of the Jātakavisodhana, a short biography. It's a 15th century monastic scholar from Burma. Studied at, I forgot to mention the monastery. It's I don't remember the name. I think it's the Six Tamarind Flowers Monastery. It's a monastery in Panya, in the city of Panya, that at that time was one of the important kingdoms in Burma. He graduated with flying colors. He was a great student. He learned all the grammatical books and all the books of the Pitaka. But this is the crucial moment or the critical moment in his biography. He moved to Sagaing, a little bit up north. He crossed the river. He moved to Sagaing in order to learn the art of Naya. That is always according to the chronicles. We don't know that for certain, but this is what the chronicles say, and more or less what we can see from his production. So he learned the Naya, or the method of interpretation of text, and his most important works are the Manisara Menjusatika, that's an Abhidhamma commentary, a sub-commentary on the Abhidhamma Tasangaha, the Gantavarana, short grammatical work on Nipatas, or adverbs, the Manidipa, a commentary on the Abhidhamma Anutika, the Mahanisaya, as the name indicates, this is in Burmese. It's a Nisaya or Burmese commentary on the Mulatika, the Abhidhamma Mulatika, and the Jātakavisodhana, philological notes on the 10 major Jātakas. So just as an example of his style, he wrote this Mahanisaya that I haven't seen, and I think even the people according to the introduction to this edition, I think they've seen some manuscripts. There is one handwritten copy of a manuscript in one of the libraries in the Shwedagon library in Yangon. But that is at the time when they published the book in the 1970s. Maybe that is all lost. We don't know. But there's this book, and what they tell us is that this Ariyavaṃsa's Mahanisaya is very large. It would be around 600 pages in a printed edition. And that is just a commentary on 7 pages of the Anutika. That means the sub-commentary, 7 pages of sub-commentary, which corresponds to it's the commentary again in turn of 4 pages in the Mulatika, in the ground or the root commentary on the Attasalini, and not just the Attasalini in general. This is only the 600 pages explain only this stanza, one stanza, these 2 verses or these 4 padas, Karunavias, etc. So this stanza is elaborated or is explained in 600 pages in this book, the Mahanisaya. So this is one of the books by Ariyavaṃsa, and that is not an exception. So he was known for his detailed and elaborate style. Perhaps this is his hermitage, according to what they say today, in Sagaing, this beautiful place where you can see many monasteries and pagodas. That's where he went to learn the art of commentary. And you can see this is not about the Jātakavisodhana, but I think it tells a little bit about the methods of writing by Ariyavaṃsa. This is from, I think, from the chronicle called the Sasana Alankara, but it's quoted in the introduction to the Jātakavisodhana. At some point, he wrote the Manisara Menjusa, and he received some criticism by another monk. So he told that other monk, my venerable friend, I have not composed this book in a conventional manner. I opened my parabike, that's the concertina book or concertina notebook in this case, because it's blank. It's not yet a manuscript. It hasn't been written. It's a notebook, but it's a parabike. It's not palm leaf. It's parabike. It's paper. So I opened my parabike at night when the sound of birds and humans has ceased. And during the day, when the sound of birds and humans returns, I close my parabike. So he worked at night to enhance concentration. Yes, there was no coffee, no other means to do that, so he had to work at night. And that's just an example I also want to show, although these are not the verbatim words by Ariyavaṃsa. This is not written by Ariyavaṃsa himself. And it is possible that the chronicle is describing the way of writing books at the time of a chronicle, that's in the 19th century. But in any case, here we're saying that he was actually writing the book. And this Manisara Manjusa, we call it a treatise, is a book, a cham, but it seems that these are the notes that he prepared to teach. So it's teaching material. He was writing this sub-commentary on the Abhidhamma Sangaha. The next morning, apparently he was writing at night. The morning he would go and teach to the crowds and then keep going. So the Jātakavisodhana is much shorter. And again, as I will discuss, I don't know if we can call it a treatise, but it's certainly a cham. It's a book that was kept in manuscripts. It seems like a collection of notes. It's also known as Ariyavaṃsa Jat Ganti, which helps or confirms the fact that the main problem was difficult words in the Jātaka, so dealing with difficult words in the Jātaka. Not all the Jātakas, but the 10 major Jātakas. And the book would try to solve or untangle these knots. The gantas are knots, so it's like untangle the knots that are difficult words and decide the right reading. If anyone is interested in Gantipada literature, there is a very good book in 3 volumes. That's Petra Kiefer-Puhl's Die verlorene Gantipadas zum buddhistischen Ordentrek. That's mainly Vinaya Gantipadas, but there is a very good introduction on this type of literature. That was many of these books have, as the title makes it clear, they are lost. They are lost. But there used to be a huge literature on difficult words. So one of the questions when reading the Jātakavisodhana, of course, if you read books about Burmese literature, they'll say, well, Ariyavaṃsa wrote many books. One of them is the Jātakavisodhana. But is this a normal book, or can we just call it notes? Or is it kind of work in progress? Was it meant to be published, or was it his own notes so that he could improve on the copies of manuscripts? Was it used then to improve on the copy of Jātaka manuscripts? I don't know about that, but for instance, the word jam that is used in Burmese, it can mean, according to the Burmese English dictionary, it could mean the wooden strips to keep palm leaf manuscripts in place. You can see that here. This thing here is what is called jam. That's the literal meaning, but eventually the word jam means any type of book or treatise, type of academic book or philosophical book. It's a treatise, a thesis, or a text for swearing in, taking a note. That is an extended meaning. So in the Jātakavisodhana, unlike other Ariyavaṃsa texts, it has no introduction, prose or verse. There is no introduction. That's already, I don't know if I can call it a red flag. Like, it's very strange, but there's no introduction at all. There is no colophon either. There's only one line that could have been written by anyone. Like this book was written by so-and-so. Like Samanta Pasadika Maha Ariyavaṃsa Terena Rachitam Dasa Jātakavisodhanam Nityitam. So the book is finished. That's it. But that could be his own book. I mean, it seems that it could have been written by anyone. There is no explanation on the reasons why he did that book, etc. And maybe that sounds irrelevant, But there are so many examples especially in this period. I mean, after the 10th, 11th century, of medieval Pali commentaries that always follow the same system of commentary. And it is very important that at the beginning you have to pay respect to the triple gem, and they pay respect to the teachers, and then you have to say what's the name of your book and what's the purpose, etc., following the venerable old Indian tradition. So that is something that everyone did, including Ariyavaṃsa. He did that in the Manisara Menjusha and other texts. So why not here? So maybe this is not exactly a treatise to be published, to use the modern term. Something else, we don't know, but we have to take this into account, because this is not just a normal book like others. Now, again, an important question, and I have 10 minutes, so I'll try to wrap. Another important point about Ariyavaṃsa's Visodhana is that we see a Pali philologist of the 15th century, mid-15th century, working in his workshop. Now, I don't know if you are aware of that, but there is this saying that is repeated in many Pali textbooks, that our canon, the manuscripts that we have, they have been filtered to a great extent by the editorial efforts of Pali grammarians in Burma from the 12th century onward. And the 12th century is the date of the Saddhaniti, that is one of the most famous, most important Pali grammars. So this all comes from the preface, the introduction to the Saddhaniti edition by Helmer Smith, it's short, very much to the point. It's not very clear what he meant by that, and I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but somehow he says that the Pali that we know is a function of that 12th century Pali of the grammarians and so on. So he says, if my memory is not incorrect, we can check it later, that anyone interested in a Pali of real historical interest will have to go through the grammarians, and then, of course, to the authors of sub-commentaries and so on. But the idea would be that somehow the grammarians, they influence the Pali that we have. And of course, this is probably true, but when we see how Pali scholars worked, for instance, in the 15th century, and we're talking about a scholar that is Ariyavaṃsa, that has been very influential in Burma, a scholar whose scholarship has been known to a monk that was also part of the Sixth Council committee, that also responsible to, even though these are elite monks, they are the ones responsible for our editions. So we see that they don't work exclusively on the basis of grammars. They use any possible source, including grammar. And grammar is not used I'm talking generally, but in this case we can say it's not used necessarily as only as a source of authority. It has the same authority or even less than the canon or commentaries, but it's mostly a way of talking about words. So what grammar provides, more than the right or wrong way to say or write something, it's a type of discourse that helps the philologists to explain their point and why a certain reading is right or another reading is wrong. So it's a kind of code or a language. And then by using different strategies or nayas or methods of interpretation, and by using many different types of sources and authorities, including as I say, the canon, different types of commentaries and so on, including then grammars and philological books, they decide which reading is correct and which not. So now, to conclude, some examples. I've taken this one from the Vesantara Jātaka because it's a well-known Jātaka, and just examples. There are much longer discussions than this one, but this is an example of a commentary on one word. So what this means is that this is a vocative, varavannave, it takes the ending e with reference to the forthcoming vocative in the same line, that is kanye, belonging to the ga category, and that's it. That's what the Burmese says. I think I forgot to say that this book is written in Burmese, although it discusses Pali words, but it's one of the earliest Burmese books written in prose, and a treatise written by a monastic in Burmese discussing Pali. So it's one of the oldest examples of Burmese prose. So he writes in Burmese, but he still uses technical terms from the grammar. So when he uses ga here, the ga category, this is a grammatical category. It means the feminines ending in a. So anyone who knows grammar and the declension system and so on, so you know, okay, this type of feminine. So he's using grammar, of course, but not to influence the text in any way. It's just to explain what kind of word is this, and that's it. This comes from the Kachina Rule 60. Another example, in the Jātakavisodhana, he quotes this word, Jatomhi Vesavitiyam Tasma Vesantaro Aham. This is one of the readings, and that's when Vesantara is explaining why his name is Vesantara. So he said that I was born on the road of merchants. That's why I'm called Vesantara, the one born in the road. So here we have Aham, and the European edition has Ahun, and Ariyavaṃsa quotes the Caryapitaka, Jātetta Ves, so it's a parallel in the Caryapitaka, Jātetta Vesa Visikayam Tasma Vesantaro Aham. Ariyavaṃsa also informs us that the reading Jātomhi is also documented, not just Jātetta, but Jātomhi. Then we can check the Caryapitaka in the Burmese edition is Jātetta Vesavitiya, which is not exactly the same Caryapitaka that Ariyavaṃsa was reading. Ariyavaṃsa was reading Vesavisikayam, Ariyavaṃsa Vesavitiya. Then the European edition, Jātomhi Vesavitiya Tasma Vesantaro Ahum. They both read Ahum, not Aham, like the Caryapitaka. Then Ariyavaṃsa, as a kind of conclusion or decision, he says, well, Aham, if we read Aham, that will be the subject. But if we read Ahum and you check the Saddhaniti, that is the grammar, there is one rule that says im kochi. That means in some places, im becomes or im is replaced by and that would be an example. So again, he's using the Saddhaniti, but it's not that he's trying to impose the reading of the Saddhaniti or anything. He's just using the grammar as a type of code or way of speaking about words. And by the way, this rule is not found in Kachina, or Rupa Siddhi, not Saddhaniti. It is only found in Saddhaniti. Now here again, another note, the word kwachi in grammars, that means in some places. In general, if you ever read a Pali grammar, we think that we understand what kwachi means. It means sometimes. It's like an option. It's okay, sometimes it's written like this, sometimes like that. One of the questions that at least I asked myself is, after a few years studying grammars, is what do they exactly mean and why do they use the word kwachi that literally means in some places? And before, you remember, we've seen in the Patimokkha-visodhana that he uses kattachi and kwachi, that means locations, to mean specifically manuscripts. So it is quite possible that the grammars themselves, rather than describing a kind of abstract grammar ideal grammar of Pali, they're trying to do is to inform us of what is normal in manuscripts. Like in some manuscripts, in some places, you read in this way, in some places, you read in that way. I'm not sure about that, but there is something about these variations with kwachi in the grammar that points to the fact that grammarians are just coping with variant readings. So again, the grammar would not be very helpful in deciding which variant readings are correct, because grammar themselves are also offering us many different variants. Another example, just this one to conclude, there are a few more, and I have the slides if anyone wants it. I still need to correct a few places, but this one is interesting because we see that Ariyavaṃsa sees this variant. One manuscript reads upaguiham, and he says this is not desired. He uses the expression malo, and the verb lo means to want something. Something is desired or expected. We want that, or we don't want that. So opaguiham malo, we don't want that. Opavaiham lo, that is what we want. So he decides what we want. Opavaiham is desired. That is what we want. So he excludes or discards one reading in favor of another. And the reason to do that, or he supports that on the basis of the Abhidhana Padipika. For those who don't know that, that's a relatively late text, 12th century. So it's not a very ancient and venerable authority from the time of the Buddha. It's a relatively late text, but he finds this word opavaiha, rajavaiha. That means it's a vehicle for a king, and this opaguiham or opavaiham refers to an elephant. That's the famous royal elephant in the Vesantara Jātaka that Vesantara gives away, and so on. So he says opavaiham here is correct. That is what we want. So the manuscripts containing upaguiham that we should discard. What's interesting here is that if you check, for instance, the most up-to-date Pali English dictionary, Margaret Cohn's T-O-P, you can search for the word Upaguiham, which is recorded as probably a wrong reading for Upavaiham. So actually, modern philologists have reached the same conclusion. We have observed the same thing, but we still have manuscripts with this reading. So it means Ariyavaṃsa was reading a kind of he had access to a strain or a branch of the manuscript tradition that we still have. Again, the CPD, the Critical Pali Dictionary, lists also Upaguiha, probably wrong. It says Obaguiha or Opavaiha, etc. And we have it's in the European edition also we have Upaguiham, and in the variant we have Upaguiham. So if we read the Faustball edition of the Jātaka, he also saw in these Burmese manuscripts, that B manuscripts are Burmese manuscripts, they still had Upagu. So the Ariyavaṃsa he tried his best, but he couldn't manage to eradicate these wrong readings from the transmission. So there are other examples here, but you can see a little bit what we mean by philology or deciding what's the right or wrong text. I think regardless of the obvious fact that this is not following the historical critical method that we use in the West, whatever that means, and it needs many different variants. There are some analogies, there are some similarities that arise from the same problem. That the problem is just we have several manuscripts with different readings, and then we assume that one of them is better than the others. We assume that the text had one reading initially, and then we try to make sense of that. So by looking at these works on Visodhana, especially the Jātakavisodhana, then apart from learning perhaps more about readings that have been lost in our Jātaka text, so for philologists, for modern philologists, that is useful, but it's also useful for those who are interested generally in Theravada scholarship, I think, in the history of the transmission of knowledge and text, because we can see it's a rare example, I think, this one, the Patimokkha-Visodhana and others, we can see how scholars were working in time periods that are very ill documented. Like we don't know much of it. We hardly have manuscripts from the 15th century or the 17th century, but we have a few works of scholars who are working and consciously talking about the difficulties that they have with manuscripts at that time. So I think for anyone working on Pali texts generally, of course, those who are more interested in manuscripts and textual criticism, more study on this type of text is quite useful and quite revealing and quite interesting. So that's all. Thank you very much for your patience. And now I think we have a little bit of time for questions. Thank you.
So thank you very much for that very